This sequence of experiments is done in order to collect data and establish the efficacy of throwing the spear in a duel. The athletes involved in this test are a small group of associates of Sala IL CARMAGNOLA, which is taking part in a study about pole weapons. Their preparation in historical European martial arts is both competitive and theoretical, and they have varied levels of experience. Instructor Enrico Campobello coordinated the phases of the experiment. First, we verified the presence of references of throwing the weapon against the opponent in medieval fencing essays. So, we asked an expert of the field, instructor Mauro Carapacchi. As we can see in our sources, the throwing of the weapon is a very well-known technique. We have a first example talking about Master Fiore dei Liberi. In his essay, specifically we refer to Ghetti, in the section about one-hand weapon, the master shows an opponent who wants to throw a spear and describes what the player has to do to respond to this technique. We have a second example when he shows the Dente del Cinghiale against three opponents. Among these three opponents, one wants to throw even two spears, and another wants to throw a sword. So we see that it is possible not only to throw a spear in a fight, but even a sword. Changing author and talking about fighting in armor, we can name Tal Offer. In his personal manuscript, called Tot.290.2, in the section about fighting in armor, immediately after the figure where the fighters enter the fence and prepare for the fight, we can see the fighter on the left prepares to throw his spear, and this is also written in a note. In the second figure, we can see the reaction to this technique. Changing source, once again, we talk about Gladiatoria, whose author is unfortunately anonymous. In the section dedicated to the spear, which is the beginning of the fight, we have to consider that this is a judicial fight, so the fighters enter with spear, sword and dagger. Many techniques include throwing the weapon to hit the opponent, and then assault him immediately after. There is a very curious figure in Gladiatoria where a pommel of a sword gets unscrewed and thrown to the opponent to distract him and then assault him and finish the duel. Once we verified the historical accuracy of this technique, we defined the equipment to conduct the experiment. Since, first of all, we have to grant the safety of our athletes, we used modern protections for historical European martial arts and the most realistic weapon reproductions, but respecting competition safety standards. We have to say that in competition, throwing the weapon is not allowed, but this prohibition was imposed only to grant the safety of the referee and the technical staff in competition area. These competition standards are written in the official regulation of Torneo Medievale del Conte, one of the most important Italian competition of historical European martial arts, where spear discipline is included. The first phase of the experiment is throwing the spear against a fixed target. We put a balloon at different distances and, with a series of throws, we calculated the percentages of success. Our results are the following. At a distance shorter than 5 meters, the throws that hit the target were 95%. At a distance between 5 and 7 meters, instead, the percentage was about 85%. After that, increasing the distance, the percentage drastically goes down below 40%, which means less than a half. Naturally, an expert martial art player, like an instructor with 10 years of experience in historical European martial arts, has a higher percentage of success than a less experienced athlete who has practiced only for 2 or 3 years. Anyway, the values we reported are the average of a very big number of throws. After that, we timed the throwing, including the time needed to change the grip from classic two-handed on-guard grip to reverse palm grip on dominant hand that is perfect for a good throw, finding the right balancing point and the throwing itself. It is interesting to notice that preparation time is quite long, 3.5 seconds on average. Considering this data, we suppose that a throwing distance shorter than 5 meters exponentially increases the risk to be hit by the opponent's spear during preparation time. In the same way, a throwing distance longer than 7 meters exponentially increases the chance not to hit the target. So, we can suppose that the best distance for a good throw is between 5 and 7 meters far from the opponent. We continued our tests and we substituted the balloon target with the bib of a real spearman, armed, aware of the throwing and determined not to be hit. The target spearman could decide if deflect the spear with his own weapon, move and try to avoid it, or even hit the opponent before the throwing. The results are very different from the ones with fixed target and surely very interesting. At a distance shorter than 5 meters, the throws that hit the target were 10%. This is because the target spearman had time and space enough to neutralize the opponent before the throwing was done. At a distance farther than 7 meters, the throws that hit the target were 0% if the target spearman was an expert instructor, 5% if the target was one of his students. That proves it is very easy to avoid a throw from such a long distance, contrary to what modern movies could suggest. Finally, we considered our estimated best distance between 5 and 7 meters, and the throws that hit the target were 25% against an expert instructor, 45% against one of his students. Anyway, still, the percentage of success is lower than 50%. One of the last phases of the experiment was to compare our data to what happens in a real sparring or a competition. Actually, thanks to the element of surprise in a fight, the percentage of success slightly increases to an average of about 50%. Finally, we elaborated the data and prepared the following recap. We hope you liked this video.
Bella!